Welcome to my channel. If you're enjoying this type of stories, please consider subscribing. I have added rain sounds because I know a lot of people like to listen to horror stories for sleeping. Anyway, enjoy. That time I met a murder. Hey everybody. This might be a lengthy one. Some things to note beforehand. I'm 27 now and was 16-17 when this happened. I was young and on dating apps when I shouldn't have been. Names mentioned will obviously be changed for privacy reasons. Mostly I want to tell this story because I want people to learn from my mistakes. So here goes. During the end of the school year, it had just started to get really warm out here in the Midwest. If any of you are in the Midwest, you know the weather is all over the place, but the summer is always hot. I was working on an end-of-the-year project, ironically about serial killers, as it was my high school psychology class. I was doing a presentation on Bundy, Dahmer, and Ramirez. This is important to remember. One night after I had wrapped up some work on my project, I got on Grindr. I've always had an attraction to older men, and at this time it was men much older than myself. As I laid there and scrolled forever, I got a message from a 47-year-old man. Clean-cut kind of guy with long hair. We chatted back and forth for a bit and seemed to hit it off. We exchanged some pictures, yes, even the naked ones. Dumb decision, I know, and we flirted for a bit. I obviously had to be careful at the time, so we agreed to meet up the following day at a place on the outside of town. There wasn't any intention on doing anything sexual, just meeting to kind of feel each other out. I woke up the following day. I'd say it was around noon, and I had the day off of work, so I sent him a message and proceeded to go to our meeting spot. I remember being the only car in the parking lot when I arrived, which I thought was strange considering the weather and how popular the spot is, but I just shrugged it off. He was already there waiting for me, and as I approached, he was very polite and greeted me with a hug and a smile. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and he had the kindest look to him. We sat down at a table under a little gathering area. I remember just looking at him in silence for a few minutes to read his body language. And then a white caterpillar caught my eye and my attention shifted. After some small talk, I remember he asked me, "So what are you doing in school that has you so busy?" I told him about some things that were strugglesome for me, and I brought up my project that I was excited for. I told him all about how I had this really cool presentation for psychology about notorious serial killers, and that I knew I was going to get a good grade because I had worked so hard. The shock then only set in when he responded after smiling at my rant and saying, "Well, I don't know if this gives me brownie points, but I murdered someone." I felt the emotion drain from my face, but I tried desperately to hold my smile so that I didn't come off judgmental. I was scared that if I shifted too abruptly that he'd react. So I asked him more about it. He said that he had just gotten out of prison on parole after serving 30 years, and that he was 17 when he committed the crime. In that moment, I thought about it and how at 17 he'd surely be a much different person, and maybe he had grown up. I had parents that had been incarcerated numerous times as a kid, and they still managed. They didn't get arrested for murder, but if they could change, he could too, right? He didn't elaborate further, so at the time I didn't know just how bad the crime was, but I speculated in the moment. As we sat there, we started talking about bullying, and I expressed that I was just annoyed at the time because I was one of 2 openly gay men at my high school, so it was hard. He shared some of his annoyances from when he was in high school as well, and went on to tell me one of the most chilling things I've ever heard in my life. He looked at me right in my eyes and said, "Yeah, as you get older, you still get annoyed. There's a lady that lives next door to me that plays her damn TV too loud at night, and I just want to go over there and shoot her with my shotgun through her window." I saw his eyes in that moment, and when they say that people look different after murdering someone, they're right. His eyes looked emotionless in that moment, like that was a normal thing to say for him. He even laughed after saying it. At that point, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck shoot up, and I was genuinely scared, more so than I had ever been in my life. I thought quickly, and decided to make up a story that I had to head home because my mom would be finishing dinner soon. We were out there for quite some time, and she'd be wondering where I was. I hadn't been on my phone this entire time. So we stand up to walk out, and I could feel him behind me, but I didn't want to run as I was concerned that this may excite him. As we were walking out, my boss was walking in with her husband and her daughter. I didn't know at the time that she recognized him, but I looked at her and just mouthed, "Help!" Quickly her face turned bright red when she saw him, and she looked back to me and said that the store needed some extra help with an unexpected rush. So I jumped in my car and headed to my work, because I had a friend there that I knew I could talk to. We had this customer that came in every night for coffee. The sweetest older man, and as I was telling my friend what had happened, my boss came in shortly after. She chewed me out, of course. The older customer came up to the counter as he usually did, but he heard us talking and he told me everything. Shockingly so. He just so happened to be the bailiff on the trial that convicted the guy I had just met. Back when the guy I met was in high school, he had a friend whose uncle was gay. At the time, his uncle had contracted HIV, which had turned into AIDS due to lack of access to proper medication. At the time, the only other man in town that was openly gay, we'll call him Liam. It was rumored that the uncle and Liam had been seeing each other, so the friend and the guy I met went to Liam's house one night. The guy I met had put a hatchet into the back of Liam's head and left him in his garage for 4 days just to die. It's also important to note that he admitted that he also did it because Liam was gay. Ironic, right? It came out later that the uncle contracted it from someone else entirely and through IV drugs. Not because he was gay. The rumor was only created because at the time they were still associating HIV as the gay disease, and he used that as motive to murder Liam. Anyways, I'm not sure where he is now. He did pop up at an old job of mine back in 2016, oddly enough, to say hi. And then again in 2018 when I was working at a local drag bar. Thankfully, he didn't recognize me. This case was also made into a book. I hope that throughout this read, you take something from it, and just be careful out there. And to the guy from my small hometown, let's not meet again. Worst Hinge date I've ever been on. I told my friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age. We had a good convo, and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person, and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, and she said he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few more drinks and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said we should go back to her place. And I mean, I wasn't going to argue it. She was hot lol. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking, and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics, and was fine. And again she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house, and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd, because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. It just didn't make sense, and before I could say anything, she just kissed me and out her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was pretty hot, and I quit caring about the cereal Lol. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed, and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp. A scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was going to fuck the dude up, or try to, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane, and she told me he does this and goes away. And I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" And she said yay, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared and kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know, this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar and I was terrified. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked. The serial, I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I will kill you both. I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her in there again. Train station guy. Almost a year ago, I was at an empty outdoor train station at night, waiting for my train. Although it was an eerie ambiance and I was a bit cold, I didn't feel unsafe. I had full view of both sides and could see from a big distance anyone approaching, and was hoping noon would. However, I spot 2 men coming to the train station. Of course, in my mind, I don't know if they are there to take the train or to do something harmful, especially as a woman. As they get closer, I get more stressed, until the younger man receives a phone call and answers it with a cheerful tone, in a language I don't understand, and walks right past me, nodding as a way to say hi, and sits on the floor pretty far from me. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking the second man is going to follow him. However, he stops in front of me, eyeing me up and down. I ask if there's a problem in my language, although not sure if he would understand me. He does, however, and answers me in my language, saying that there is no problem. He says I'm beautiful and asks me why am I so sad. Although annoying, 8p he just seemed like someone's dad, unaware he's making a random girl uncomfortable. I try to nod along until my train arrives, when he asks me if he could sit next to me on the train. I should have said no, but I just sort of shrugged uncomfortably. I get on the train and try to get away from both men quick, but sure enough, the older man sits beside me and the younger one in front of me. It's okay, I think. I just have to get to my destination. The older man starts trying to make eye contact with me, and I try to look away. He keeps telling me I'm beautiful and asking me questions about my life, to which most of them I don't answer truthfully. But things started to get weird. He started telling me I could get any guy I wanted, started telling me that God wants me to be pregnant, and that it's time for me to, tells me I'm truly beautiful over and over again, and that race doesn't matter. We're different races. He tries to put his arm around me and things like that for quite some time. He then asks me if, when we arrive, I want to go with him to insert nearby village. I say no, and he keeps insisting, saying I have to be free and be happy, and I keep saying no. He then changes the subject, asks me why I'm so sad. I say I'm not. He says, yes, you are. I say no, and this goes back and forth until he says that, yes, I'm sad, and he knows because he's a medium. He knows I just need to be free and get a man. And that if I go with him, he can help. I tell him no, and that my dad is waiting for me. He asks, is your dad strong? To which I reply, very. He then seems to calm down a bit, and I text my friend explaining the situation. We're talking, and he asks me who I'm texting. I just ask why he wants to know, and he says that I should give him my socials in case I need his advice. I tell him no, and that I don't feel comfortable with that, and he insists that I should give him his number and that he's really good at helping women. This is when my friend calls me. Salvation. We talk until I get out of the train. I walk until the parking lot and don't seem to see the guys of the train nearby. I go to hide myself somewhere to call my dad, and as I'm looking at my phone, I feel someone hug me. It was the train guy, alone for some reason. I push him off and clench my fist ready to punch, and he tells me he just wants to say goodbye. With this weird tone, he starts getting close to me, pursing his lips. I push him off, run and call my dad. I broke into tears as soon as I was safe. I truly think that man could have done something horrible to me that day. Please, let's not meet again. I ever tell you you look like Jesus, man? In my junior year of college, I went to a party across campus at the creative writing department. I was blasted on edibles, and the scene was lame, so I just grabbed some munchies and dipped. As I was walking back to my room, I realized that I was obliterated, probably the highest I had been in my life up until that point. It was very dark outside, probably around 8 p.m. It was pretty deserted despite it being relatively early, probably because it was blisteringly hot and nobody wanted to be outside. I walked in front of a dorm that I didn't live in, and a man sort of appeared out of the darkness and said to me, I ever tell you you look like Jesus, man? I was very confused because I had never met this man before in my life. I was trying to figure out if I had known him from somewhere, and being high just made the whole interaction even more surreal. I don't think so. I'm sorry, where do I know you from? Then he said, oh, I guess you don't know me? I have a friend who lives here. Can you get me into this building, man? Immediately red flags were going off in my head. He looked like he was in his 40s. The school I went to had very few non-traditional students, and his opener was just bizarre, and basically already told me that this was a guy who was trying to be deceitful. I was just staring at him bug-eyed for probably an awkwardly long time, and I think he could tell that I was scarred shitless. He had a sweatshirt on, which was another red flag considering the heat, and reached an arm under the jacket. Time slowed, and I thought that I was about to be mugged or worse. He then opened his jacket and said, see, no knife, no gun, I'm a good guy. You don't need to worry. This made me think that I needed to worry. There were so many less sketchy ways to explain his situation if he had a legitimate reason to need to get into that building, which I couldn't do anyway, since keys could only get you into the dorm you lived in. It might have not been the smartest decision because I am not very athletic or fast, but I just sprinted out of there at full speed. I was too afraid to even look behind me, and I didn't even check behind until I got inside of my building. It didn't seem like he had followed me. I was on the school paper, and as part of that, I would routinely check in with the campus police to see if there was anything in testing going on worth writing a story about. A few days after my encounter with Scary Guy, the officer I would usually talk to told me that they had to arrest a man trying to break into a dorm, the same one that weird guy was in front of. I asked if the person they arrested matched the description of weird guy, and he did. Apparently his girlfriend, who was like 15 plus years younger than him, by the way, had lived there and texted him that she had broken up with him, and he tried to get in to confront her about that. He was apparently found trying to open a window on the main floor by another officer, maybe 20 minutes after I had run away from him. In hindsight, I feel bad that I hadn't called the campus police on the guy. It just wasn't even on my radar, and I didn't want to be around any cops high out of my mind. I was just glad that it ended well for all involved. They followed my partner to our door. My partner and I had a really unsettling experience tonight, and I can't shake the what-ifs. I was asleep during this incident, but I woke up to the sound of him rushing back inside our apartment and locking the door. When he told me the details, it left me with an uneasy feeling I can't get past. We live in a suburb that has a reputation for being a bit rough, but a lot of the crime and drug problems are contained in the center of the suburb. Our area is quite sheltered from these problems, and during the day, it's busy and full of people, with a university, a hospital, and locals going about their business. At night, the streets near our building are quiet, but not in an unsettling way. It's usually peaceful as we're tucked away from the main road and surrounded by other apartments and a park. However, the past week has made me feel like things are changing. Last week, we heard a couple arguing loudly in the street from our balcony. It escalated quickly and turned physical, so we called the police, who intervened. Then, just a few nights later, we saw a car pull up near the park. A different woman jumped out and ran into the trees, hiding while the man in the car drove away. He didn't follow her, but we've seen them in the park before. They look like methed up gym rats. He's often yelling at her and calling her stupid, among other colorful names. We never saw her come out of the park and didn't even know if she was still hiding. That time, we didn't call the police. Maybe it was the feeling that it wasn't worth reporting unless it got worse, after already reporting an incident a few days prior. Although these were domestic incidents, I think this reluctance to report suspicious occurrences carried over when this encounter happened with my partner. He told me later he didn't want to get a reputation for calling the police over everything, like the boy who cried wolf. But I wish we had done it sooner. At about 1 a.m., my partner took our dogs out for a quick toilet break before bed. When he returned to the building, he noticed a man and a woman standing outside an apartment on the ground floor, quietly talking. He hadn't seen them before, but didn't think much of it, as there are 8 floors in our building with about 12 apartments on each. He entered the lift, and just as the doors were closing, the man stopped them with his hand and asked if my partner could take them to level 7, as they were locked out. They must have followed somebody through the doors to get inside initially. My partner explained that residents can only access their own floors, and told him no. Thinking back, they would have had to sprint from where they were to reach the doors before they closed, which is what had me questioning my partner's situational awareness. But I will continue the story. The man shrugged and said, "Any level should be fine," and both he and the woman stepped into the lift anyway. My partner told me that he just froze and was trying to analyze the situation in real time. He said they didn't look like the typical meth users or necessarily threatening, but their energy seemed unpredictable. He didn't know how they'd react if he pushed back. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he knew something wasn't right. Not wanting to escalate, he let them in the lift. As the lift went up, the man was looking at my partner in silence, while the woman was crouching towards our dogs making kissy faces. Even this contrast was unsettling for my partner, as there were no obvious threats here. In fact, you could argue that she was being nice. When the lift reached our floor, the couple told him to step out first, and then they followed him. My partner walked quickly to our apartment, noticing they weren't too close, but were definitely behind him. As soon as he got inside, he locked the door immediately and started listening. For the next 5 or 10 minutes, we could hear them pacing up and down the hallway, talking in low voices. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but their calm tone made it even creepier. At one point, they opened the fire escape door across from our apartment and held it open while still talking in low voices. Eventually, they let it close, and after that, everything went quiet. Since we don't have a peephole, my partner got on the floor by the door, trying to see them through the crack underneath. I crouched with him, but he could only make out faint movements before they finally left. An hour later, after we were certain the hallway was silent, we carefully opened the door and checked the hallway and fire escape together. They were definitely gone, but my partner was still shaken. He kept replaying the situation in his head, wondering if they could have hurt him if he'd refused to let them stay in the lift. I insisted that we report them to the police and ended up providing their descriptions, just in case they were still loitering around. I wish he hadn't let them see where we live, but I understand why he froze. He keeps saying their energy was off, and he didn't know what they might do if he told them no. I'd like to think I'd have refused to let them in the lift at all, but honestly, I don't know how I'd react in the moment. The thought of what could have happened if they'd lashed out makes my stomach turn. The whole week has made me feel like our area isn't as safe as it once was, and this incident was the final straw. Why would they follow him to our floor, linger for so long, and hold the fire escape door open before committing to leaving? Their calmness only made it more unnerving. If they were truly dangerous, they would have forced their way inside as my partner opened the door. It leaves me with some hope that they were just opportunists, and maybe I don't need to worry about them coming back tonight. The door is double bolted and the extra lock is on. My partner is now sleeping soundly, but I'm still wide awake and alert. To the man and woman who thought any level should be fine and followed my partner to our door, let's not meet. I was stalked in 2024 by a minor, and it was hell. To preface this, I'm currently 19 going on 20. Due to a vindictive teacher, she manipulated the grades so I would have to repeat the 3rd grade because I called another student a brat for crying about wanting her mom. The context behind is irrelevant, but the rundown is this girl thought because her mom was a teacher, she could cry her way into her mom's class. Her mom was a high school teacher and would almost always cry until she was allowed to go, and her poor would be distraught, having to leave her class and pick her daughter up because she wanted attention. I ended up snapping and telling the girl she's in the 3rd grade and is too old to be crying for her mom and disrupting other students leaving. Probably harsh, but you could tell this girl was spoiled. On to the actual person in question. In August of 2023, I was in my junior year. I went to a trade school in Sumeru County for graphic design. A sophomore named James had taken notice that I wouldn't be dropped off at our home school like he was. He offered to drive me home. I didn't know this kid well. I spoke to him a few times, but other than that, I wasn't buddy-buddy with him. I told him my mom prefers to meet people before just letting my ride in a random person's car, especially a guy. With me being 18 at the time, I told him that if he got into a wreck, I would be responsible as the adult in the car. After that, he didn't really bother me with anything. We still talked and could tell he wasn't neurotypical. It wasn't until my senior year that things got creepy. We exchanged numbers because I would sometimes help him with homework he didn't fully understand and give recommendations of horror channels on YouTube, such as Reddit stories, creepypasta readings, or channels that cover disturbing videos like Hannah the Horrible, Nick Crowley/Nexpo. Within a month, he found my home address. I never told him where I lived, and he got dropped off way earlier than me. The way the homeschool worked was that all the students on the west side of Fontaine, going into Solani, would go to one singular middle school and high school, while students from East Fontaine, going into Liyue, would go another high school. I never told this kid where I lived, let alone a rough area. I started documenting everything at this point, no matter how big or small. The next following months, if I would fall asleep on the bus, he would tap my headphones, snap them on my ears, kick my legs, shake me, or call my phone, just so I would talk to him. In April, he asked me to go to prom with him, and I tried to tell him multiple times that I wasn't interested, and he tried to manipulate me, to which I just lied to him and told him that I had a family event that day. After that, I said something to the principal of him harassing and shaming people to go prom, and he gave the most insincere apology ever. He worded it like he was forced to apologize. I get a phone call the next day of him asking if my sister drove a red car and worked at Sanganamiya Coffee House. I quickly told him no, and blocked his number. I went to administration, coupled with the fact this kid would call to ask if I went to the Dollar General, went to work, or if I was at home, told me thoughts he had about killing his mom's boyfriend, how he wants to smash his teeth in, smacking his phone against the window, and tried to manipulate me into calling while he was having a panic attack, and ranted about how my math teacher needed to be gutted because she was overweight, and that fat women are ugly and horrible vessels for producing babies. She's not overweight from poor diet. She has a medical condition that caused a buildup of estrogen. The worst was when he lashed out in anger about him losing his AirPod case and aggressively stomping on his AirPods and literally foaming at the mouth. I went to the principal and liaison after this, only to be unable to talk, and they yelled at me for an hour about how I was being mean to a kid on the spectrum, and that my information, my mother's information, and my sister's information is public information. I started having a panic attack and called my mom. At this point, I was literally vomiting in the trash can of the conference room. My mother was pissed. My mother told me to call the sheriff's office after I get home. The sheriff actually went to this kid's house and told him to knock this shit off, or I had every right to file stalking and harassment charges. The 180 Women's Shelter confirmed that the principal and liaison did was disgusting and dangerous. So far, I haven't seen him, and I still have his number blocked. Hopefully, I don't see this little bastard anymore. To James, if you see this post by some chance, stay the fuck away from me and my sister. I hope your future general finds out about this shit. Yeah, that's right, this fucker wants to be in the goddamn army. Should I see him again? I won't hesitate to press charges against him. I don't care if it ruins his life forever. He's a danger to those around him and potentially himself. I almost became another statistic in a Bulgarian park at 4 a.m. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who study abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year. The first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable, cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. Let's call him Ben. He's about a year younger than me and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and its various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice, hot summer, and I was enjoying myself until one particular night. I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and decided to head home. I should describe the layout of the city, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts, there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I'd done many times. People had warned me about occasional attacks, muggings, robberies, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west, so I had to leave them after 5 minutes and continued alone with my music. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I came to a park I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving even at 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that someone was approaching him from behind through the bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard someone approaching. It all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was happening. You need to understand that this all happened so fast, until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I turned and ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind me even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked, and I couldn't speak straight. But I didn't need to say much, as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the big window with the rock. When the glass broke, he finally ran away. What makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and then killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. Here, or if this post pastes a link, I have put it in the description. I waited a few minutes, put my music back in, and walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterward, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this turned out okay. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing might have saved both me and the guy on the bench. If I hadn't entered that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think I learned that there are some situations you cannot control. Stay safe out there, folks, and maybe don't walk in the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. But maybe that's common sense. A woman keeps calling me begging for help. I work for a university in a resident assistant position. On weekends, we usually work in teams of 3, with 2 people walking through a building and 1 person at the front desk checking people in. While me and my coworker were walking on the 9th floor engaging with students and enforcing the rules of the residence hall. My coworker suddenly received a call on our work phone, surprisingly from our on-campus police. She picks up the phone to a woman frantically crying for help. Before she can respond, the phone is hung up. This was especially a scary moment for us because of the authenticity of the woman's crying. Unless it was an audio recording of a movie, I have no doubt that this was a real person in extreme distress and not a prank. The worst part about the whole situation is that we had received the same call a few months before, with the same people working at the same time and on the same floor. With our team of 60+ people, it is extremely unlikely to work with the same 3 coworkers twice. When we started our shift, I actually made a joke that we would get the same phone call, and we did. After getting the phone call twice, we both agreed that they were accidentally redirected 911 calls, especially since the number that was listed was literally the police phone number. We called the non-emergency number, same number, different extension, and talked to the dispatcher, who was not too helpful. I don't really blame him because it is such a random event. He took our names and said he would report it. However, the thing that creeped me out even more is that he mentioned that they haven't received any calls at all that night, and there, for nothing, could have been accidentally redirected. This is when my mind suddenly clicked. Earlier, near the start of the school year, I had received a call from the same campus police number, and it was just my boss who was asking me to come to her office and help a lost student. As I got the call, I remember panicking as it was a campus police caller ID. This was before either of the calls of the woman crying. I told her about her caller ID being wrong, and she agreed it was weird, but retired literally weeks after the talk. At the time, I didn't find this weird, but now I look back at it, I think the call begging for help might have come from her office, which is now empty. Me and my coworker walked to the office hallway, which is connected to our building, and tried getting into her office, which was locked. It is important to mention, we got the call both times at around 10:40, and it was now completely dark out with no one around, especially in the staff area. All the offices are completely inaccessible to the public, but one room me and my coworker had the key for. We opened the door and found one of the old phones in the office and used it to call our work phone. You guessed it, it rang as campus police. Now we are scared. We cleared the rest of the buildings for anyone in distress and even checked a local emergency pylon students can use to call for help. After finding nothing, we went our separate way and ended our shift an hour after midnight. Now I am sitting here trying to figure out what the fuck that poor woman was calling us for. Why did she hang up? Why did this happen twice with the exact same unlikely circumstances? Why was the caller ID from the police? This is getting long now, but I will make some important notes. Our third coworker is a man with a thick accent. He could not have prank called us from the boss's phone and pretended to be a woman. The first call back in October was of a woman crying and saying, "Please help." The second call I didn't hear, as well as my coworker received it. She said it felt different, but was definitely a woman crying, begging. I am in an area with a lot of human trafficking and feel a strange sadness/fear that this may be what I heard. I have worked here for 2 years and am good friends with most of our team. No one has experienced this except us. I only have 2 possible theories. The call was a redirect from the police, and the dispatcher chose to hide his mistake. Someone snuck into my boss's office and called us begging for help. I am writing this partially because I'm too scared to sleep, and partially to know if anyone can think of a better reason for the calls. Around 15 years ago, I lived in Chicago and worked at a restaurant in the Loop, where I sometimes worked split shifts, i.e., work the lunch rush, then come back a few hours later for dinner. I didn't usually like to go back home in between, as naturally, once I got settled in, the thing I wanted to do was go back to work. So if it was nice, I'd walk around downtown, sit and listen to music in the park, etc. If it wasn't, I would literally just get on the L to ride around and read or listen to music for a while. One day, it's the latter scenario, and I'm riding what's a sparsely populated train as it was afternoon on a weekday. I'm on the inside seat of 2 facing forward, and a guy who just boarded the train plops himself down next to me, even though there are plenty of empty seats. There was nothing particularly objectionable about him, just seemed like an average guy, probably in his mid to late 20s. I was annoyed he chose to sit down next to me when there were other places to sit comfortably, obviously. But before I have barely registered my annoyance, he lets out one of those giant dad sneezes. Everyone in the car turned to look at him, which is probably good for what followed. He had covered his mega sneeze with his hand, and to my disgust, he extended it to shake my hand and introduce himself. I did not accept the handshake, but said hi and maybe gave him an awkward elbow bump. He seemed affronted by this, but continued to try and make conversation with me, loudly. He quickly started asking personal questions like what I did for work, where I lived, where I grew up, how long I had been in the city, etc. Clearly he was trying to gauge both my naivete and my income, so I was vague at first, and eventually just stopped answering altogether. He then gave me a sob story about how he was on hard times, and maybe I could spare him some money. I didn't really believe this as, despite the sneeze, he had nice clothes and was well groomed. When I told him I had no cash on me, he said, "Well, I bet you got a 30-day transit pass, so you could give me that." Maybe I should have just given it to him, but the 30 days had just started, and I made next to nothing for living in Chicago. Like hell was I gonna fork it over? So I decline, and he says, "Listen, I wasn't going to tell you this, but I have a way of getting what I want." Obviously, I'm getting scared now, but as I mentioned, he was talking loudly, so the other people in the car were subtly paying attention without getting involved to this point. At the next stop, a bigger crowd was on the platform, and I used the opportunity to get off and cross over to head back the other direction. The guy got up and made to follow me off, but some of the people who knew what was happening strategically got in his way, and soon the crowd was boarding, and he wasn't able to get off before the doors closed. Phew, that was close. But wait, there's more. Fast forward several months later. I can't recall the scenario exactly, but I was eating dinner quickly by myself at a Qdoba nearby where I worked. I was either in between shifts again or done for the day, and I needed a break from our food. I was facing out the windows to the sidewalk. Back a bit, not at the ones directly against the window. I see a guy outside hassling someone he doesn't appear to know as I'm sitting there eating my burrito. There's something familiar about him, but can't put my finger on it. Soon, he leaves the other person alone, and he turns his head to look directly at me. And then I remembered it was the bully from the L all those months ago. He creepily smiles at me, and to my horror, walks into the restaurant. I'm like, there's no way this guy remembers me, when very clearly I'm not his only target. I think maybe that's not who it was, or he saw someone else, but nope, he comes and stands right next to me. He says something along the lines of, well, that looks good. Remember me? I told you I have a way of getting what I want. Let me have that burrito. If I were a brat, I would have said, doesn't seem you're very good at it, seeing as you didn't get anything off me or that guy outside, but I'm more of a freeze response type. So I just ignore him, keep eating, and since there are other people in the restaurant, I gamble he won't make a scene. I started to get worried as he seemed to be trying to wait me out, but I am extremely stubborn when I put my mind to something, and I was not going to leave that restaurant before him. I ate very slowly, got refills, got more napkins. He tried to pretend like we were friendly, trying to make casual conversation, but I kept ignoring him. Finally, he got distracted by another mark outside, but before he left, he said to me, "I'll see you again sometime." Once I was certain he was not lurking around, I waited for a crowd and fell in to make my way towards the L and home. Thankfully, I never saw him again. I am certain his story about being homeless was not true. Even though months of cold weather had passed and we were well into winter when I saw him the second time, he was still nicely dressed and well groomed. It kind of seemed like he had ditched that story anyway and was taking a more aggressive tact. It honestly didn't scare me as much as it flummoxed me. He reminded me not only of the song I titled my post after, but also Debo from the movie Friday. Just an old school bully with no real motivation other than to intimidate people. And of course, what were the odds of running into him again in a different part of the city? And that he'd remember me after all that time? In retrospect, though, I should have been more scared. He wasn't just a run-of-the-mill common criminal on the streets of Chicago. Something was off. At the time, though, my mental health was in a bad place, and I was making minimum wage in an expensive city. It didn't seem unreasonable to me to risk life and limb for my transit pass or dinner. I got lucky. Yes, I made some calculated risks, but still, it wasn't worth it, and I hope my kids wouldn't make the same call or be in a position where they would. But at any rate, let's not meet again, you cowardly, pathetic excuse for a man. Stalker. Reading the posts in here reminded me of a stalker I once had in the late 2000s. At the time, I was in my early 20s. I was always out every weekend and DJing at gigs a lot. A few of my friends introduced me to a few people, 2 women and 2 guys. I spoke with them all, and they seemed nice people. Then a few weeks later, they were at a gig I was playing at. One of them took a shining to me. We shall name her Donna. Donna was your stereotypical oddball. She had buck teeth and didn't smell too great. After I'd finished my set on the decks, I saw a woman I'd known for a while and had a dance with her. She was someone I fancied at the time, and I think she liked me. For a little while, I lost her as she was in and out of the smoking area, talking with friends, etc. Then, after that, she had totally gone, and I thought, okay, maybe she had to go, and I'll catch up with her later another time. Anyway, Donna was all over me, and I really wasn't bothered, but was politely keeping a distance. After that night, I found that she would rock up in a lot of places I'd go to, whether it was me DJing or even just going to an event with friends. On my night off, she seemed to be there all the time. Fast forward a month or so, and I see her in the local supermarket, which started to make me think, this is creepy. I sorta had an uncomfortable exchange with her, saying hi and swiftly moving on. Again in the coming weeks, I'd randomly bump into her, and it was getting all a bit too weird. On another day, I was walking to the beach and walked past a house. Outside was what I thought was Donna, and sure enough it was. She had a weird grin on her face, with her buck teeth poking out while putting her rubbish out in the bins. I knew that she lived in a rough part of town, but here she was, in my ends, in the nicer part, living there. I found out from a friend that she moved to, in his words, be near me, which he also thought was so creepy. I got this feeling I was being watched. Something didn't feel right. Anyway, a little bit after, I wondered what happened to the lady I fancied, as she was awfully quiet when usually she was chatty. I go to Facebook and find she has unfriended me. I started to think, what did I do wrong? And felt it rather strange. I also felt quite down, as I really liked her. Fast forward a week or two, and I was still out and about DJing and going out to nightclubs with my friends. Donna started to appear again. In the end, one night she came up to me and said that she loved me, moved near me to be with me, and wanted to have kids with me. She said she'd been watching me from afar and that she knew I felt the same way. At that point, I was so freaked out, I just exploded and shouted at her to leave me alone, and that if she carried on, I'd get the police involved. She ran off crying, never to be seen again from me anyway. That night, a few people told me that she was slagging me off to other people so that she could have me to herself. This also made sense, as the woman I actually liked went cold on me and booted me off her Facebook. She actually didn't go out with our little friend circle no more and locked herself away a bit. It actually took me till a few years ago for her to re-add me back. She found out after all these years that I wasn't a horrible person, and that she wished she hadn't have believed what Donna said. Apparently I was a sex pest and narc who beat up women. I was shocked at what was said, and it took about 10 or more years for her to find out the truth. She said she always fancied me, and I did used to fancy her too. She is in a relationship at the moment, but has been for a while. I was single around 2022, and said that if she wasn't with someone, I'd have asked her to be with me. She said if Donna hadn't have fucked it all up and caused trouble with her BS, then we may have been together. My feelings are different now. I'm with someone else and have been since 2023. So me and this woman from back then just said we are both glad we found someone to be with in the end. I'm glad that we got to talk and clear the air. We realized what Donna did with her narcissistic ways, and I had a lucky escape from her. I heard she had since fallen out with everyone as she borrowed money and never paid it back. She was also stalking someone else. Lucky escape, because if she had carried on, I'd have got the police involved. So Donna, let's not meet again. Thank you for watching. Be safe out there, guys.